Hey folks, it's Tommy Z back again with another video. Today, I'm going to take you through my Westworld Spitfire audio score. And I'm going to show you my session. I'm going to tell you about my workflow. I'm going to let you listen to some of the sounds. I'll tell you where I got the sounds from. In short, I'm going to try to keep this session as productive, as inspiring, and as informative as it can possibly be. The first thing I want to talk about is before I even go in the studio, okay? This is a phase called the architect, okay? There are 4 phases to my work. Let's start with this. The 4 phases are 1, architect, 2, kid in a sandbox, 3, builder, and 4th, what I call cleanup crew, okay? And just to give you a quick overview of these phases, architect is number 1. This phase takes about maybe 10 to 15% of the time that I spend on any given project, and it happens when I receive a brief or when I'm solving a problem. It's my way of basically not even going in the studio yet, but trying to understand the problem as well as I can, okay? And I've heard it from a few intelligent folks who are no longer alive. People like Nikola Tesla, for example, famous inventor. I wouldn't say famous. He's getting famous now, but he was quite obscure for a long time. But people like Tesla, I think he had a quote that said, you know, I work differently than most people. I will spend most of my time solving the problem here in my mind before I actually set out to do any real work. Einstein said a similar thing, which is like, if I have an hour to solve a problem, I'm going to spend, or if I have an hour to come up with a solution, I'm going to spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem. Now, obviously, in our case, we're composers, we're musicians. We can't afford to think the music into existence. We have to actually get into the studio. But I think what these guys were saying is very, very valuable, especially for anybody who's involved in a creative craft. And this is the idea that you don't start rushing to solutions right away, but you allow your brain to really identify the challenge, the context, the unique characteristics of this problem, the parameters or limiting factors that basically narrow your available options. And you really try to understand what this scene is doing and what this film is doing. And normally this is what's called spotting between a composer and a director, right? They will sit down, they will look at each scene, and they will decide what is the best way to treat this musically. But obviously, I didn't have a chance to speak to a director on this one, but I'm happy to speak with myself. There's plenty of voices inside my head. I'm a Gemini. For all you Geminis, you'll understand exactly what I mean. And so instead, I did a spotting session by myself, basically me and my journal. And all of the students in my masterclass know I'm a big fan of journals. And the reason for this is because journals allow you to externalize, or they allow you to put all your thoughts in front of your eyes. Most of the time, your thoughts are behind your eyes. So it's very difficult to organize them, sort them, make any sense out of them, right? So this is why I like journals, is because I can start writing down all the things that come to my mind as I watch this scene. And because I now have it in front of my eyes, I can organize these things in order of importance. See what are the important thoughts about this particular challenge? What thoughts aren't so important? What ideas come to mind? And when your mind is able to really understand the problem, let it sit with it for a bit. You know, we have an incredible ability to come up with ideas as human beings, but only if you allow your conscious and your subconscious mind to work on the problem. So give it some time. And this is why I separate my creative process into stages. And the first stage, which I call the architect, is usually around 10% or 15% of the time that I allocate to the entire project. So in other words, I spend 10% of the time that I allot to the project thinking about it. Just writing down ideas, walking, taking showers. You know, it's just like just walking around with the problem and letting my mind build up ideas and associations so that by the time I get in the studio, I'm pretty confident that I understand what this thing needs to be. And more importantly, that I feel really spontaneous and intuitive by the time I go in the studio. And you can only feel spontaneous and intuitive and effective at the same time if you truly understand what the nature of this problem is, okay? If you don't really understand the problem, or you're not really one with the problem, you don't really understand what's needed yet, you're just guessing, and you already start making music, then you really risk getting in trouble very quickly, and not being able to make decisions also very quickly, because you just haven't internalized it enough. So that's the first phase, the architect phase. The second phase is my favorite phase, and that is what I call kid in the sandbox. And here I will spend normally around 20% of the total working time on the project. So we have 10% for thinking about it, 20% kid in the sandbox. Then the third phase is going to be the builder. So this is where we actually come up with a solution. This is the hard part. This is where you actually put in the work, you start moving things around, you're actually building the answer. And the fourth part is what I call cleanup crew. And that's essentially like the last 10% of the project. And that's where I, work with mixing, automation, some effects, just like icing on the cake, right? So just to recap, my workflow. I receive the brief, I look at the picture, I spend some time in my journal, taking walks, few days, just thinking about it, just letting myself internalize the challenge at hand. That's about 10 to 15% of my total working time. Then it's the kid in the sandbox. And that is where I just go off and play and collect ideas and sound design and come up with inspirations and try different patches and connect my synths to some weird pedals and just try to find the right palettes and the right sounds for this show, for this scene. And I'm going to share that with you in a bit. And that takes about 20 to 25% of the total working time. And the reason why I take so short in order to do this, because this work is really quick and fun, but it doesn't actually propel you or progress you toward the answer. And so we need to get out of that sandbox at some point and get real and get moving and move on to the more difficult phase. And so the more difficult phase, the building phase, this is where most of the work actually gets done. I would say it's like 50 to 60% of the total working time. So that's where most of the activity happens. And then when I'm happy with the overall result, the last 10%, the cleanup crew, is like, just fixing loose stuff, automating, smoothing things over, doing some mixing and things like this, okay? So I already told you about the architect phase. I got in my journal, made some notes. The next thing I do, is I will open a session, literally, bring the picture in, try to determine the tempo, okay? The way I do this is obviously I will have nothing in my session to begin with, only the film file. So I will just play this film file, watch it a few times, especially where the action is going, see how the edit is cut, see what kind of a pace is happening in the edit, and then just try to imagine the right tempo and the right melody that will be the right expression for what this scene needs to accomplish musically. In this case, I decided that the tempo would be 130 BPM, okay? And so that's the only thing that I actually think about at the beginning in this phase, in this kid in the sandbox phase. Just like, what's the tempo? After that, it's all playtime, okay? This phase is the funnest phase. It's just about experimentation, exploration, just like the title of this phase suggests, Kid in the Sandbox. Get your hands dirty, be spontaneous, lose track of time, get sand in your hair, don't use your head, okay? This phase is not about using your head. This phase is about nodding your head. The only goal of this phase is I'm looking for goosebumps, okay? I'm not looking for structure. I'm not looking for the answers. I'm not looking to provide the solution yet. Here I am only looking for goosebumps and collecting sounds and textures and loops and things like this that will allow me to use as building blocks for the next phase. So what did that look like in practice? Well, in this case, what I did is I pulled out my Prophet Rev 2 synth and I started playing around with sounds that could be a part of this Westworld world, okay? So I took my synth, the Prophet Rev 2, I connected it to one of my favorite toys, one of my favorite boxes, which is the Meris Merkury 7. And this is a reverb pedal, which has all sorts of really interesting stuff going on. Like, basically, it's a reverb that also gives you a space decay that modulates the trail of your reverb, that will literally pitch shift the trail of the reverb up an octave, down an octave, up a tone, down a semitone, up a fifth. It'll give you all these crazy shimmer effects. The best way I can describe this pedal is it's basically like the new Blade Runner soundtrack. That's the kind of like ambience that it gives you. And it's wonderful when you plug in, when you put anything through it and just experiment. So because I allow myself time to experiment, I just started like coming up with things that would feel right for this Westworld world and this scene. So check it out. Some of these things were like this. So that's the synth going through the pedal with this crazy trail. Listen to that trail, right? And just having fun with this. And because I already spent a few days thinking about this, this scene and this show and this problem at hand, instinctively, when I would come up with these sounds, I would already be like, yeah, this is check. Like this sounds like it belongs to that world. So then I work very quickly in this phase, right? It's just all intuition. I will automatically take something like this, like an audio file that I like, and I record this as audio, by the way, into Ableton. And I will duplicate it and reverse it right away. Because I'm like, well, this is pretty cool thing that I can use on a downbeat, like to put accent on measures. But like, what if I reverse this and use this as like a, you know, as like a ramp? Check this out. Right? So you see this. So I'm just having fun with sounds and I'm like, yeah, this is cool. Okay, what's next? Well, we have this eerie thing, which is definitely a part of this problem that we got to solve. We got to have some eeriness in there, but we definitely need pace. This thing is all about pace. And one of the ideas that I had that I wrote down in my journal was I need to have as many different ways of indicating or suggesting or making you feel that pace as possible so that I can vary them throughout this score. Because if I only have one rhythm section and it sounds the same, I can't use that for 4 minutes and feel satisfied that it's gonna keep the viewers interested, right? So I was like, why don't I build up like all these different ways that will indicate rhythm and have all these blocks available to me that I can then choose to use in different sections of this score to keep the viewer interested, but at the same time, to keep the pace going, okay, without getting bored with it. So one of the things that I came up with in my Sandbox, and I literally called my session Sandbox. Like, check this out, you see? Here, there's no goals other than goosebumps. So one of the first things I did is started experimenting with some of my favorite VSTs and putting them through effects that would be unexpected, okay? Because another thing I wrote down in my journal is like, what is the Westworld world? It's like the connection of humans and future. To me, that suggests like connection of things that are acoustic, maybe analog, with things that are more futuristic, synthesized, right? So it's this combination of natural and artificial, but cool sounding. That was really kind of the compass as far as creating the sounds for this. So check this out. I'm going to share this sound with you. I'll show you what I mean. So here we have Spitfire Labs, which is free. You can download this. Amplified Cello Quartet, Tremi. This is what it sounds like. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty cool, but it's like, it's almost too straight up orchestral. What if I can mangle this thing or affect it in a way that would make it Westworld and at the same time give me this feeling of pace. So I put it through this plugin called Output Movement, which basically takes a sound source and it creates like a rhythmic pattern out of it. And this was huge for me. So check out, this is what it sounded like. And this is what happens when I put the output movement on it. And you see how I'm not concerned with the solution yet. I'm just looking for the right sounds. And it just takes a quick glance at the picture and listening to this and to these patches where you're like, yeah, this is coming together. This seems like the right DNA, right? So then I just keep moving and creating stuff, right? Here's some kind of an Omnisphere patch. Let's take a look at it. That's going through a bunch of stuff. Let me turn off the bunch of stuff. And this is an Omnisphere patch, which is called, let's see, Underground Records. And it comes with Omnisphere. And this is what it sounds like without any effects. Right, so it's pretty intense, overbearing, and it takes up a lot of the frequency spectrum. And at this point, I was like, okay, I have some of these ambient things happening, but I'm looking now for rhythm because rhythm is going to be a huge component of this spot. So again, I pull out the output movement, and then I also put this thing through a compressor in Ableton called OTT, which just squashes it. Okay, at every frequency band, the high, the mid, the low, it just squashes the crap out of it. But you can see that I adjusted this frequency a little bit. So the highs are turned down, the mids are definitely turned down, and the lows are almost completely turned down. So basically, we go from this to this. Okay, now you see how I'm starting to get a sense of the pace with the kind of sounds that are not usual, right? And not just drums, but like something interesting. So I'm already satisfied that I'm going in the right direction, and I just want to create in the sandbox phase more and more and more layers. And I'm pulling them from, VST patches. I'm pulling them from my samples, like audio samples, from Splice. There's not a lot of Splice going on here. It's mostly VSTs, but there's no rules or limits, okay? I'm not thinking. This is the whole point of this kid in the sandbox phase. We are not thinking. We're playing. No thinky, just play, okay? So I'm just pulling in different things. I'm like, yeah, this is really cool. Really works well with especially this dude losing his marbles over here. That's cool. What else we got going on? Lots of rhythm. So here I took Action Strike's Native Instruments and put again the OTT compressor on it, which gives it a lot of bite. Notice that. I remove any lows because the lows are going to come from somewhere else. And I just keep going. Let me show you one of the things that really got me excited as I felt it'd be one of the main elements of the track. And this was this little guy right here, which originally is an Omnisphere patch called Colors of Light. And this is a stock Omnisphere plugin. So it sounds like this. And I'm like, this is right, this is like, it's fine, but it's just like a little boring. What I needed to do is cross over into this Westworld territory where it becomes a little more interesting, a little more unique. But also I want it to be more rhythmic because right now it's all bass. But let's see if I can really crush it and change it so that it becomes almost percussive in a way. So what did I do? I put 2 OTT, like one OTT compressor is enough to smash the living daylights out of any sound. But now I put 2 of them on this sound. And so we basically go from this to this insanity. okay? And this is like the first time when I started really getting excited. Like this is when I started getting the goosebumps saying, you know what? Some of these things that I'm adding as a palette, it just seems right. It just seems right. Again, folks, I'm not worried about sequence structure yet, okay? Not worried about any of that. I'm just having fun with collecting different sounds, okay? So this process goes on where I basically very roughly try to get different blocks of sounds going in this session called Sandbox. And I'll experiment with a variety of different sections. And I'm not even really looking at the picture, to be honest. I'm just trying to collect or create enough building blocks that I can basically sequence them in the next stage. So it'll be just silly things like this, right? Another favorite thing of mine, which I really loved early on in the Sandbox phase when I was still seeking inspiration, were these two sounds. Let me see if I got that right. These two guys. Check this out. And then it does something like this. Watch this. Really love that. Really love that. And it was just really nicely coming together, like this basic DNA of the track. But you can see it's a giant mess here, like just all these things happening. But that's okay, it's supposed to be a mess. We're in the Sandbox. So once I come up with enough building blocks of different varieties, so I have some electronic, I have, you notice here, I have literally my stems of playing with the Prophet Rev and the Reverb pedal. You see that? And this is what the Sandbox phase is about, just creating these textures and these sounds without a care about the solution just yet. And I also, in the Sandbox phase, came up with really rough sketches of getting away from the electronic and more into the orchestral, so I can combine them in the next phase. So I just started roughly sketching these things here. Let's see. And these are Spitfire Audio hand Zimmer strings. So I just wrote really rough, quick string arrangements. I pulled in some Spitfire Audio, London Symphony Orchestra, cello and cellos for the bottom end. Very quick, like very quick, just... It's like a rough sketch. I'm not concerned about the answer. I'm just playing, just matching colors and things together. And at some point, this session becomes really messy. And like, I'm not feeling as if I progressed in any way yet. Okay, because I'm not even looking at the picture carefully and trying to solve each scene. I'm just having fun with the sounds. So I literally have to get out of this session at some point and start a new one. So what I will do is export everything that I really felt like it belonged. Everything that really was giving me goosebumps. And I will export everything as audio, okay? And I will literally start a new session called Session, okay? And this is where we move from phase 2 to phase 3. The phase 3 being the most difficult phase, the phase where I will spend the most time, the phase where I will scratch my head the most, the phase where I will walk away frustrated from the desk, the phase where I will go home at night feeling as if I don't have an answer just yet for the 30th second of this scene. But this is the phase where all the progress is made, literally. And so it is an important phase. And the reason why I get out of the Sandbox session, it's almost like as if I'm switching mental modes. So now I'm going from the kid in the Sandbox saying, okay, that session is done. Now we start brand new. We bring the film again in, but now we're looking at it with a different part of our brain. And this part of the brain is the builder. This is where the architect and the builder sit down again and they look at the picture and they go, okay, before we even pull in everything we did in the sandbox, what we're going to do is first take a look at this film carefully now, because we weren't carefully looking at the film in a sandbox phase. We were just picking sounds and intuitively going, yep, this is right. Pull it in. This will be great. And just building these grooves. Now we're actually concerned with solving the problem and not just screwing around. So the first thing I'm going to do is the tempo was already established, 130 beats per minute. So now what I'm going to do is take a look at the film carefully and create a MIDI channel right under the film and fill it with empty MIDI blocks, which I can name and color intuitively so that I know what the structure of this construction is going to be before I even pull in the sounds from my sandbox, okay? We need to objectively go, what does the intro need? What do we need here? What do we need here? So notice how I do this. Basically, I'm looking at the film, right? Without any music, without any sound. And I'm just going, okay, here nothing's happening. We just need to set some kind of a minimal mood. Here, the action is starting to ramp up, but we're not off to the races yet. We're not moving. So we need to create a ramp to gear 1. Here we're moving. So we need to establish the pace, but notice what kind of a note I made myself here. Don't give away everything. In other words, let's make the viewer feel that we're off to the races, but let's not show all of our cards yet because the peak is still to come. And so we need to be careful with managing how we build this thing. So I'm looking at the film going, okay, what's going on here? Man, this is kind of the focus of the shot here. The guy's losing his marbles. He's switching genres. We need to acknowledge that in the music for sure. That's one thing. But the other thing is this sort of feels like it can be a switch between gear 1 and gear 2. And this was very important for me to keep the pace feeling relentless, but so that people don't get numb, so that people don't get bored. You can't pound people in the head with energy for 4 minutes. You just can't. It's going to backfire. So what we need to do is set up these peaks and valleys, essentially, okay? And this is one of those short valleys that the film suggests I could do something here that isn't related to the chase, but is just related to the guy switching gears or switching genres, as they call it. And I can also use that as a breather or a transition from gear 1 to gear 2. So gear 2, start smaller than gear 1, room to build. So I write these notes to myself. Like you notice, I don't know if you've ever seen like rally races where rally drivers are sitting with their pilots and they're going like 200 miles an hour down a narrow country road and their pilot is yelling like, okay, gear 4, hard right? This is kind of what I do for myself in order to know what it is that I'm going to be doing. So here I tell myself, okay, gear 2, start smaller than gear 1, and then we have room to build. Because this is where things really, really start, right? As far as the story goes. Here, as I'm watching the picture, I'm seeing that there's these wide shots. We're outside of the car for most part. And then we have this beautiful overhead shot, really cool. So that to me says, let the music go more anthemic, bigger, wider. But then, even though here it looks like, we're in the middle of the chase, right here, we're actually going back to the car. And even though the race is still going on, the chase is going on, we actually need to hear these characters talking. And this is not a peak moment per se. So notice how I'm sort of building the architecture here with these MIDI clips and descriptions. Even though the track should go big here, I'm saying here, prepare to land, because we're actually going to go back inside of the car. And guess what? We actually need to have a valley here. Why? Because here is where the peak starts. So this is great. This is going to allow us to have the sort of a peak, anthemic peak here. This is going to allow us to land. This will allow us to have a valley and a build-up, preparation for takeoff. This will be peak pace and adrenaline. Okay. Then we can't keep the adrenaline going for very long, right? I mean, we have to switch it up or else people will get numb. And so here's where I'm like, okay, we're going to bring in the strings here and relax the rhythm. So we're going to keep the feeling of pace, but we're going to switch it up so that there's some variety as far as our sounds and instrument even, okay? And we're going to try to create drama in a different way with strings here. Then we will build up the tension again here because, look, we're building up here, right? The guy sees the car explode, but watch this. There's another car coming. Whoops. So it's almost like, oh, I thought that was the peak and I thought we were going to get off this roller coaster, but no, we build up again. But guess what? I can't build up again with the same palette and do the same stuff or else it's going to get boring. So here is where I have to build it up with strings. Here was a string rhythm. Here's going to be a different string arrangement. It's going to be more of a build-up, okay? So then I'm watching the film and I'm like, okay, she literally says stop here.
Stop.
So that suggests to me, hey, maybe I can stop the music here, especially because we haven't gotten off the roller coaster yet. Guess what? Here is going to be another build-up, okay? This will be the build-up where we finally get off the damn roller coaster and where the thing ends. But this suggests to me that we need to have some time, just a moment to stop, breathe, get our wits about us before we take the viewer and listener on the final build-up. So this really is, like, conceptually speaking, and this is what I wrote down in my notebook, just a series of peaks and valleys, folks, okay? It's just a series of peaks and valleys. And basically mapping this out with these MIDI clips now allows me to pull in all of the stuff that I've done in the Sandbox, having fun, and then arrange them arbitrarily for now in these building blocks. And what I did in the Sandbox does not account for all of the sounds. I've added a lot of stuff. As you can see here, all the MIDI clips here are things that I added. All the audio clips are things that I brought in from my Play Sandbox session, okay? So I want to go through now and finally let you hear some sounds and let you hear what each of these chapters is made up of. Let's do that very quickly. And I'll tell you where these sounds came from, as much as I can remember them. So opening is quite simple, right? Here is just an Omnisphere. Here is just an Omnisphere patch of some sort. I can't remember what it is, some ambient patch. It doesn't really matter. It's not really of consequence, right? This is simple stuff. Here is where we need to prepare to get into the chase scene, to ramp up to gear 1, as I call it. So here is where I have the things I experimented with in the Sandbox being useful. So here we have the Prophet Rev 2 going through that Merkury 7. That's a very nice lead-in into gear 1. I also have some eerie sounds, which are from an Omnisphere patch that was made by this guy who calls himself The Unfinished. I really recommend you look this guy up. I don't know him. I don't have any business promoting him other than the fact that he does amazing work with the patches. He's also a film composer, I believe, so he has a really good sensibility. But he builds patches for different synths. And so some of his patches made it into this score, like this one. So here again, I'm just ramping up for gear 1, okay? So it's just a bunch of ambient sounds, a ramp that leads somewhere. And then let's look at gear 1. This is where we're off to the races. Let's see what that sounds like. So we actually start pretty intense, but you'll notice that then I dial back that intensity when the chase really gets going. And but let me first show you what's happening here, okay? So we have this wonderful thing, which I love because, again, it establishes a pace, but it's not drums, right? And this is what I was looking for, multiple layers of this that I can basically use as building blocks throughout this. So we have this, we have this patch where the guy's losing his mind. And then we have basically a number of different pulses. Pulse and pace were the two words that I wrote down in my journal. Pulsing and pace. That's how I wanted to basically get things across. So there's a lot of pulses happening here. And notice how basically it's saying here, don't give away everything. So sell things gradually, bring in layers gradually. Notice how more layers will come in here. You see that? And we're gradually building, right? So I had all these Lego blocks from the Sandbox session. Now it's just a matter of, based on my description up top, okay, how do I distribute these Lego blocks now? So there's a bunch of other stuff happening here. Percussive. And of course, the big drums from Native Instruments, Action Strikes. Okay, so we keep going with that for a while, and then here is where there's an opportunity to take out the drums, focus on the guy switching genres, and that allows us to switch gears. And now we're going into gear 2. Let me just unsolo everything and see how that sounds. So notice how this actually gives you a feeling that we're really off to the races, like now the journey begins. Even though we started pretty dramatic here, it only feels like in gear 2 that we're actually starting this chase for real. Check this out. And you know why this is? Because I'm not establishing a solid 4 on the floor. I just have these like drum fills from Action Strikes happening. So it's almost like things have begun here, but they haven't settled into a chase yet. And so it's only here in gear 2 that you feel like, okay, we're off to the races. And I'll show you what this chapter is made up of. So first of all, we bring in the kick, right? The kick, as you can see, was never present. This is the first time it makes its appearance here. Then we have all of our pulses, all of our pulse and paces. There's a lot of them here. Okay. To spice things up, I add a horn blare here, which is very much in the DNA of a car chase scene. Well, there's more layers, folks. I bet you never thought that there were so many layers. I mean, it doesn't sound like it, but there is. And I like it that way. I really like shaping all these different layers to work together as a whole. So, okay, so here we established that we're really off to the races. Then we look at our next chapter. What is our next chapter? Gear 3, make more anthemic and bigger. This is because we're gonna have some really cool shots, overhead, wide. So here what I do is I bring in more instruments. Let's take a listen. And we just create another evolution. Very simple melody line, That's pretty big. Okay, let me show you exactly what comes in here. So we have this Omnisphere arpeggiator, Hans Zimmer strings from Spitfire Audio in different octaves. I also have horns here. Check out how just the orchestral stuff sounds. And I felt like melodically, this corresponds to the picture. Gives you a bit of intrigue. But we keep things simple. The goal actually of the music here for a chase scene is not to get so musical and so sophisticated with our melodies and our chord progressions. No, it's about giving people goosebumps. It's a chase scene, right? So we really have to keep that in mind. And in addition to all this orchestral stuff, all these building blocks, all the pulses just keep going, right? So all I'm doing here is just evolving with strings and adding that orchestral element and adding this arpeggio from Omnisphere. And you will notice here that I have made myself a note to prepare to land. So I'm not expanding this melody. Here, I'm landing. So the notes just trail out, okay? Because if I actually decided to continue this melody or make it bigger, I would not be able to land. I would not be able to come back to inside of the car. Too much focus will be on melodies and not enough on what these guys are saying inside of the car. So that's why I just have these notes basically just trailing out. You see, single notes just trailing out, okay? And then we go inside of the car. So you see what the advantages of doing this sandbox phase where you're not really thinking but coming up with really cool patterns and building blocks is that you have a crap ton of building blocks that you can then move around, and then you can see, okay, when we go inside of the car, which building blocks, which one of these pace pulses or these patterns, which one of them do I take with me inside of the car? And all you got to do is just experiment. Like you can see that I had some of them going and then I deleted them. I listened to it. I'm like, yeah, that sounds better. So the point is to keep the pace going without always using the drums, to be able to dip into a valley, but not totally disappear with this feeling of pace. And that's what we try to accomplish here. How do we do that? By having something like this continue. Right? Then bring in some things that you don't even hear when the chase is happening, but are nice accents when things get quiet. That are, I think, you know, they match the world of Westworld DNA. We quiet some things down here for the dip. So here we have this ostinato, which is like, you know, really good for the gallop. But you can see that basically I bring it down for here. So it becomes quieter, makes room for other things. But we keep this pulse going. Because these things still suggest action, right? So in the first half of this, it's like literally like very small, not much happening, just like this. So, okay, we're still being chased, but we make room for their dialogue. And here is where she hands them the gun. And now I feel like I need to increase the energy. So how do we do that? Just bring in some more blocks that we had over here. Okay, so watch what happens. We go from like minimal to more expanded. You see that? It's like, get ready. Things are starting, but not yet. We're not totally off to the races, right? Made myself a note to create a takeoff feeling. So we put in things like this. This is a cashmere sweep from, you can download from Spice. And you notice it's starting here. And I like to do this. I like to give the listener the hint that something is coming. Stick around because something big is about to happen. And you can do these with these ramps. And of course, these things, which were one of the first things I created with my Prophet Rev 2. In reverse, they sound like great ramps, right? So that's how I create the build up to probably one of my favorite sections in this scene. Let's listen. So it's basically a similar pattern repeating itself. And, you know, first of all, I don't consider myself a very sophisticated composer. I'm like AC/DC of scoring, okay? Not like Pink Floyd or, you know, Iron Maiden or Led Zeppelin, where things get really melodic and maybe sophisticated. I'm like AC/DC of scoring. You know, I like to keep things very impactful and very simple, but not shallow. Okay, so I like simplicity, but I don't like shallowness. And this is why I create so many different layers. So you have a certain depth, but at the same time, you have the simplicity. So a chord chasing doesn't require musical sophistication per se. Really, the goal is goosebumps, right? So if I stuff this with like melodic content and some really impressive way of scoring strings, that might almost distract from the action. Like, we're having gunshots here. We're having tires screeching. These people are fighting for their lives. It's not really a time to show off musically. It's just a time to support this scene in the right way, okay? So what happens in this scene? Basically, we bring back the kick. This is like the peak point, I would say, one of the peak points of this particular score. So let's see. Let me break this down for you. We have the kick, okay? We have this high-pitched sound. We have this roar that we made in our Sandbox session. We have the pulses. I think all the pulses are here, basically, stacked on top of each other. We basically throw the whole kitchen sink at this particular scene. Let's see what else is here. We have our horn blares. And one of the things that makes this particular portion, for me anyway, is this thing. This high-pitched sound, which is so much about adrenaline and just things going nuts. And this particular sound is once again from the unfinished custom synth patches for Omnisphere. And it literally comes stock this way, where it's like pitching itself up. So you don't have to do anything, and it just repeats, right? And this patch, this whole patch was actually, this whole library from the unfinished was really inspired by Dunkirk. And you remember Dunkirk is like one of my favorite ways to keep things simple, but incredibly tense, to create this like roller coaster where the music is just peaking and then going down and then peaking again relentlessly. And so you can see why this patch was sort of inspired by Dunkirk. It really sounds like something that could be there. So that's one of the like highlights for me of this particular section, is this sound. The other thing that makes this really impactful is that, look, it's our friend, Native Instruments Action Strikes, that hasn't made an appearance in a while, okay? So you see how I'm dishing out things at different times in order to keep things different and not to constantly pound someone with the drums. So we have the drums here. Mind you, I put him through a couple of things. So basically I put him through this Ableton Erosion plugin, which gives them a bit of bite up top. And the other thing that I do here is this ostinato that I let you hear before. Watch what it does here. I open it up, and then watch what happens here. So I'm basically pitching it up along with that other patch from Omnisphere. And that's what creates that feeling of real adrenaline, right? And then just to add another subtle layer, just when you think you're at the peak, I add another subtle layer of percussion, just so we get that extra lift. It's this thing here. I mean, I learned this, you know, as a DJ from electronic music, is that you have these patterns and you're sort of dancing to a certain pattern. And then all you need is to add a hi-hat suddenly, and it just takes the track to another level. So this is exactly what I was doing here. Okay, so we look at our compass, pure adrenaline here. But the next chapter is gonna be bring in strings, drama, and relaxed rhythm. So that's exactly what I do. We say goodbye to my friend Action Strikes. We take away the big drums, okay? We leave the kick, and now we introduce some new things just to keep variety, just to keep people interested. So we also bring back our friend from earlier on, this arpeggiated synth. We have our kick. And then we create like a rhythmic feeling with Hans Zimmer strings from Spitfire. Very simple stuff, AC/DC. Right? Very, very simple stuff. That's what it's all about. Again, I'm moving blocks around and saying, okay, what else will work with this? Will this work with this? Yeah, that works with this. Will this work? Yeah, that works. This? Yeah, it all works. What's this? Even this will work. Fine. All right. So when I program these strings, and you can see they're kind of rough, but they do the trick, right? Because essentially, we have to think about the next scene already, which is like, where is this scene taking us? Well, it's taking us to the fact that one car exploded, but there's another still chasing them. So we're going to have to start this roller coaster all over again. So here I made a note to myself called descent. So I want to create the feeling of descent, but at the same time, later on, as this red chapter progresses here, I want to build up tension and drama with the strings. So we're going to switch up our string arrangement to try to do something different now. So let's see what that sounds like. So we have the descent. We have the situation getting more dire, right? And here's where we're building again. So let's see what makes up this track. Some Hans Zimmer strings. We switch up the arrangement here. We have this climbing melody that's going to be joined by some things lower on the bottom. Some horns. Some drama here. But let me see where those things on the bottom are. Yeah, they're right here. Check this out. So first we start like this. It's like semi-full. But notice how halfway through we're going to get really full. Especially with bottom frequencies. Very simple stuff, man. AC/DC. Okay, so then what happens next? One of our main characters literally says, stop. So I'm like, okay, what happens then? The car stops, but then what? We have another tense scene where we don't know what's going to happen and we have to build a climax. So I thought, okay, instead of continuing with this, like, where is it going to go? It has to just evaporate very quickly. We have to collect ourselves. We have to stop. We have to breathe. And then we're going to get into the final buildup. And the final buildup can't be like the things before it, because then it's going to get boring, right? If we use the same sounds. So what do we do here? We literally stop. We don't want to stop completely and have silence, because we still need to keep the tension going. We're still not at a happy end. So I leave some of my blocks on, some of my pulses here. And you notice here that I do some automation, which I'm going to get to in a second, to create a little ramp toward our final buildup. So you notice I'm building a sense of expectation again, like we're building towards something. What is it going to be? The final buildup. This time, we're using horns. We use the strings, we use the electronics. So now it's like, what do I do to keep people's interest, to keep the flavors different? And so I decided to just do the build-up with the horn section. Take a listen. Very simple. And it's sort of tense, and here, it's like we very quickly need to land into a resolution, like, oh, it's over, it exploded, they're finally gone, right? So that was the main ingredient here of this final thing as far as that build-up. But we also, of course, brought in some of these blocks to keep the tension going. So let's take a listen to what else is here. Some of our pulses, which have been with us forever, are here. We have some horn blares to build that thrill. This is not happening. Yeah. I also brought in this thing from very early on. You notice it only happened in the beginning. Then it was gone for the majority of the score, and now I thought, let me bring it in and see how it sounds here. And it was perfect for this scene. Our reverse ramps, which have been like huge heroes for us in this score. But notice, there's no kick. There's no big drums. That's not the way we were going to end this. Because if we started the drums again, we would have nowhere to go with them. And besides, we just had drums, okay? So what we did here is, let me show you here what we did. I wanted to talk about the drums. Where are the drums? The drums. Yeah, here they are. I actually missed this point, is that when we were in the section previous, we had these drums come in again, but differently, filtered in to help create this build, okay? But after that section, basically, when we're in our final build-up, it's like, well, I can't introduce drums again. I actually tried it, but it didn't seem to work very well with the timing of this bike exploding with the car. So I didn't want to make this ending that huge, because it ends in this slow motion shot and the realization that it's finally over. And so I felt like after this really intense roller coaster, this would be a good landing. And so we go from the end scene to really like this thing, which is one of the first things I did, okay, by playing around with my Prophet Rev 2 and this reverb pedal. it kind of begins this chase scene and it ends it. And it all happened in the Sandbox. It's one of the first sounds that I created. And you can see that I use it all throughout. I got a little boom here to mark the HBO logo, but that's essentially the ending, okay? So the final thing, once I'm happy with the third stage of this, which is the building stage, which is the most difficult, like this is where all the work basically gets done. This is where all your blood, sweat, and tears happen. The last stage is like the fun stage also, because I call it the cleanup crew. And this is where I will basically smooth out transitions, create automations. So right now we have automations turned on so you can see all the things that have been automated. So that's what I will do in the final stage. I will like listen to certain things. So we have some automations drawn here. Let's see what they're doing. I will just smooth things out with automations. So notice some things are filtering down and some things are just trailing off. So rather than ending abruptly, which, you know, when we go into a more silent part, you could hear potentially, I like to basically end these things in a smooth way by either filtering them down with auto filter or with this thing in Ableton called fade to gray, which you notice is going up here. And it creates this kind of like, watch this. You see how the sound sort of washes out? You'll hear it better here, actually. Watch, as this fade button goes up. Basically, you know, it's like a combination of delay and filter. And it just sort of disappears. So these are the sort of things I will do in the automation phase. There's another example here of this. Let's see what this does. Yeah, so I'm also trying to get out of this sound before we get into the car in some kind of a smooth way, right? And here, you'll notice that I bring in this sound in the final build-up by drawing automation on the filter. So I don't want that sound to happen right away. I want it to happen as the tension builds. So you see how it comes in? And it's at its strongest here, just before the bike hits the car. And then I trail it out again. So these are like, you know, when I talk about the watercolors method, which all my students in the masterclass know, which is first sketch the chalk, know the structure, know the outline, then draw the watercolors. So that means like literally come up with the melodies and the chords or the, you know, the emotional content of each section. And last is the oil. You have the chalk structure, watercolors, emotion, and then oil is the last part. And that is like just playing with little things like this, smoothing things over. This is where I will also like adjust some of the volumes, but it's really mainly working on these automations, right? Notice what's happening here. All right, I'm trying to get out of this sound before we get into the car. Here, I'm trying to build up this sound by opening up the filter. See how the filter is opening up here? It's all drawn. And then I'm trying to get out of it again so that that sound disappears smoothly for the end. So I'm already bringing it down here. And that's what the last phase, the cleanup crew, is really about. Show you one more example on the Ostinato. So this is a really nice layer because it gives that sort of upper middle frequency, takes up that space. It's got that orchestral sound, that feeling of galloping. So I'm pitching it up here as the chase is happening. And notice what I will draw the automation here. Watch, to open up the filter. Then when she says stop, I'm going to draw the automation down so that we close the filter on it and then open it up again. And that's how I create this roller coaster. Watch. Building again, just constant roller coaster. So these are the things I will do pretty much at the end. And the last step for me in the cleanup crew, so the last phase will be the mix, you know. So I will do a rough mix, add some things to really put polish on the mix. One of my favorite things to do is actually to add this plugin from PSP AudioWare. It's an emulation of a EQ, the E27 EQ. And there's a preset here called Give It Air, which I absolutely love. And one of the last things I normally do is I will put this EQ on my music group or my entire score, and it really gives it this high-end shimmer. I want to show you an example just so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to turn it off. You see how it opens everything up? This is kind of dull, but still okay, but watch now. It does what it literally says it will do, which is add air to everything. And I really like the upper frequency shimmer. I think that's a nice touch. And so I usually like to add this thing unless things are already too trebly, too high frequency. So that's basically it, folks. You saw my workflow for this. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you found it inspiring. The recap, once again, is 4 phases, folks. You need to use 4 different parts of your brain in order to create something that is magical and that feels like a whole. The first thing is play the architect. Let yourself think about the problem. Walk around with it for some time. Take showers, take naps, sleep around with it. Think about it, okay? Let your subconscious bring ideas to mind, associations. Make sure you really, really understand the problem, because that's going to help you in the next phase, phase number 2, which is Kid in the Sandbox, where you get to play. But you're not playing mindlessly. Because you've had time to internalize the problem, now you're going to work quickly and instinctively. You're going to know what works and what doesn't work, because you've already considered the problem carefully. But the goal of the second stage is not to provide a solution. It's just to provide goosebumps. It's not to use your head, but it's to nod your head. This is where you're going to build a library of really inspiring, cool, goosebumpy patches and sounds. And just when you're having the most fun, it will be time to end that session, move to the third phase, which is the builder, chapter, the builder stage of this workflow. And that's the stage that takes most of the time. That's the most difficult one, the most grueling one. That's where you're going to encounter a lot of frustrations, because you literally have to solve real problems and you have to create this score from start to finish. But again, the way we help that is by chalk, using the structure first, like not making music first, but like really knowing, okay, what do I need to do in each section, having that compass, and then taking care of each of these blocks one by one until you're happy with each block, okay? And so once you're happy with each block, the final phase, number 4, is the cleanup crew. That's where you're going to smooth things out. You're going to draw some envelopes, add some effects, draw some volume, add some cool plugins to your channels to maybe open up the sound, maybe to give a little shimmer to your sound. And actually, I don't have much of a master chain happening here. All I have is another PSP plugin. This is the Xenon limiter, and I have it set to limiter gentle, okay? And this is what makes things loud for me, okay? Check this out. Let's take it off. See the difference? Right? Whatever you do, make sure that whatever you're feeding into the limiter, in this case, the group where all the instruments are, you're not feeding it hot into the limiter. That's all you got to make sure of, okay? And then let the limiter do its job. So that's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough. I hope you enjoyed this session. If you have any questions, hit me up. I hope you got something out of it. I certainly enjoyed doing this, and I certainly enjoyed sharing my lessons from this. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with me. If not, have yourself a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.